I'm Colette, 32 years old, and a financial analyst at one of the most prestigious accounting firms in the city. My attention to detail and commitment to accuracy had always been my greatest strengths until they became the reason I was targeted. When my colleagues conspired to blame me for their mistake, I never imagined I'd be forced to sign a confession for something I didn't do. But they underestimated me. Before I dive into how I outsmarted my backstabbing colleagues, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever been wrongfully accused of something you didn't do. 7 years at Riverton Financial Services had taught me a lot about numbers, but not enough about people. I started as a junior analyst fresh out of graduate school, my accounting degree and CPA certification still smelling of fresh ink. Back then, I was just grateful to land a position at such a renowned firm. Riverton handled accounts for some of the biggest corporations in the country, and their reputation for accuracy and integrity was unmatched. At least that's what I believed. My perfectionist nature served me well in this environment. I double-checked every figure, cross-referenced every statement, and approached each audit with meticulous attention. This diligence earned me 3 promotions in 7 years, raising me to senior financial analyst with a corner office and my own small team. My personnel file contained nothing but stellar performance reviews and commendations for catching errors that others had missed. I took pride in never having a client dispute my work or question my findings. Bradley Thompson had been my supervisor since my 2nd year at Riverton. A tall man in his mid-40s with silver streaking through his dark hair, Bradley initially served as my mentor. He recognized my potential early on and gave me increasingly challenging assignments to help me grow. I respected him immensely and considered him not just a boss, but an ally in an industry where women still fought for equal recognition. "Colette, you have the sharpest eye for inconsistencies I've ever seen," he told me during my last performance review. "That's why I'm putting you in charge of the Westfield Industries account this year." Westfield was our biggest client, a manufacturing conglomerate with annual revenue exceeding $300 million. Their yearly audit was a massive undertaking that typically required a team of 5 analysts working for 2 months. Being named lead analyst on this account was both an honor and a tremendous responsibility. "Thank you for the opportunity," I replied already, mentally preparing for the workload. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Bradley said with a smile that in retrospect didn't quite reach his eyes. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time was how much Riverton depended on Westfield. Their account generated nearly 20% of our firm's annual revenue. Losing them would not only hurt our bottom line, but damage our reputation in the industry. This created enormous pressure to keep them happy sometimes, at the expense of absolute thoroughness. Rachel Morgan had been my friend since my first day at Riverton. We started in the same orientation group and bonded over being the only 2 women in our cohort. For years, we supported each other, covering when one needed to leave early or helping prepare for particularly difficult presentations. Rachel had a quick wit and infectious laugh that made even 14-hour workdays bearable during busy season. But things began to change when I received my last promotion, and she remained at the same level. Her congratulations seemed forced, her jokes took on a sharper edge, and she began to distance herself. I told myself she was just busy, or perhaps going through personal issues. I never imagined she would actively work to undermine me. Marcus Daniels, the senior partner who oversaw all major accounts, was an intimidating figure. In his 60s, with a perpetual frown and steel-rimmed glasses, he rarely interacted with anyone below management level. The few times he addressed me directly were to issue instructions or request updates on high-priority projects. Everyone knew Marcus valued the firm's reputation above all else and would do whatever necessary to protect it. Samantha Wells ran human resources with a smile that never faltered and a voice that remained calm even when delivering difficult news. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer suits gave her an air of approachability that masked her primary function, protecting the company from liability. She attended all disciplinary meetings and kept meticulous records of employee issues, always framing things in terms that would be defensible if legal action ever arose. The annual audit season always brought heightened tension to Riverton. From January through March, we all worked 60 to 70-hour weeks, surviving on vending machine snacks and too much coffee. Tempers frayed as deadlines loomed, and even minor disagreements could escalate quickly under the pressure. The Westfield audit began like any other. I assembled my team, including Rachel, who had worked on portions of their account the previous year. I distributed assignments based on each person's strengths and set up a rigorous review process to ensure accuracy. Everything ran smoothly for the first 3 weeks. Then I noticed something concerning. A section of the audit dealing with Westfield's international subsidiaries showed unusual patterns in reported income. The numbers didn't directly contradict each other, but certain transfers between entities seemed structured in ways that didn't align with standard practices. These sections had been assigned to Rachel. I wasn't immediately alarmed. Discrepancies appeared in nearly every complex audit, and most had perfectly legitimate explanations. Still, as lead analyst, it was my responsibility to verify everything before presenting our findings to Westfield executives. That Friday evening, as most staff headed home for the weekend, I stayed behind to examine these inconsistencies more carefully. The deeper I looked, the more troubled I became. The pattern suggested either significant misunderstanding of international accounting principles or deliberate manipulation to minimize tax liability in certain jurisdictions. What worried me most wasn't the discrepancy itself, but the fact that it had been overlooked. Rachel was experienced enough to have caught this, which left 2 possibilities. Either she had missed something basic, which seemed unlikely, or she had noticed and chosen not to flag it. Neither option reflected well on her work. Little did I know that my discovery that night would set in motion a chain of events that would nearly destroy my career and force me to question everything I thought I knew about my profession and the people I trusted. Monday morning, I arrived early to speak with Rachel before our team meeting. I wanted to address the discrepancies privately, giving her a chance to explain before involving others. Professional courtesy demanded at least that much. I found her already at her desk, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, as she peered intently at her computer screen. She jumped slightly when I approached. "Morning, Rachel. Do you have a minute to go over something from the Westfield audit?" Her smile seemed strained as she nodded. "Of course. What's up?" I pulled up a chair and showed her my findings regarding the international subsidiaries. I noticed some inconsistencies in how these transfers are being reported. The numbers don't match up with the documentation from their Hong Kong office. Rachel examined the spreadsheets, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she sighed. "Good catch, Colette. I'll look into it right away." "Thanks," I said, relieved by her response. "Let me know what you find. We'll need to address this before the preliminary report goes out next week." She thanked me for bringing it to her attention and promised to have answers by the end of the day. I left her desk feeling good about how the conversation had gone. This was how professionals should handle potential issues, I thought. Direct, respectful, and focused on solutions. What I didn't see was the panic that set in as soon as I walked away. I didn't witness the frantic phone call she made or the hurried meeting she requested with Bradley during lunch. I remained completely unaware of the narrative being crafted behind closed doors, a narrative that would soon make me its central villain. That evening I stayed late again, trying to reconcile the numbers myself. Without access to all the original documentation from Westfield, I could only go so far, but something about the situation continued to bother me. Rachel had not provided the promised update, and my emails to her went unanswered. The next morning, Bradley called an urgent meeting about the Westfield audit. I arrived to find Rachel, Bradley, and 2 other team members already seated in the conference room. The atmosphere felt tense in a way I couldn't immediately identify. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Bradley began, his voice unusually formal. "We need to discuss some concerns that have arisen regarding the Westfield audit." I nodded, assuming he was referring to the inconsistencies I had discovered. "Yes, I was just talking to Rachel about the international subsidiaries section yesterday. There are some discrepancies we need to address." Bradley's expression remained neutral. "Actually, Colette, the concerns are about the portions of the audit under your direct supervision." I felt my body go still. My sections. What concerns? Rachel cleared her throat softly. "When I was reviewing your work as part of our cross-check process, I noticed some troubling inconsistencies in how you recorded Westfield's asset depreciation schedules." My mind raced to understand what she was talking about. The depreciation schedules had been meticulously prepared according to both GAAP standards and Westfield's internal policies. "There must be some misunderstanding," I said carefully. "Those schedules were completed according to the same methodology we've used for the past 3 years. Rachel shook her head slightly. "Not exactly. The calculations for their new manufacturing equipment used an accelerated depreciation model that doesn't align with their reported tax filings. It creates a significant discrepancy." "That's not possible," I insisted, hearing the defensive tone in my voice, but unable to soften it. I specifically confirmed the depreciation model with their CFO before applying it. Bradley leaned forward. "Do you have documentation of that confirmation?" The question hit me like a slap. Of course I did. I documented everything. Except the confirmation had come during a phone call, which I had noted in my work log, but hadn't followed up with a confirming email. A rookie mistake I wouldn't normally make, especially on an account this important. "The conversation is noted in my work log," I said, knowing how insufficient that sounded. Bradley's expression grew concerned. "Colette, you know verbal confirmations without written follow-up don't meet our documentation standards, especially for significant methodology decisions." The meeting continued, with Rachel pointing out additional problems in my work, each presented as unfortunate oversights that needed immediate correction. With each example, I grew more confused and increasingly certain that something was very wrong. These were not mistakes I would make. As the meeting concluded, Bradley asked Rachel to work on correcting the issues she had identified. "We'll need to inform Marcus, of course," he added gravely. "But I think we can resolve this before it affects our relationship with Westfield." Walking back to my office, I felt a growing sense of dread. The issues Rachel had raised were fabricated or grossly misrepresented, but she had presented them so convincingly that even I had momentarily doubted myself. Later that afternoon, I overheard Rachel and Bradley talking in his office as I passed by. Their voices were low, but one phrase from Bradley came through clearly. "We need to contain this situation before Marcus gets too involved." That evening, a company-wide email went out summarizing concerns with the Westfield audit and the steps being taken to address them. Though it didn't name me directly, anyone familiar with our team structure would know exactly whose work was being criticized. My confusion transformed into a sickening realization I was being set up. The inconsistencies I had discovered in Rachel's work were being twisted and redirected back at me. But why? And why would Bradley participate in this deception? The next morning I tried to speak with Bradley privately, hoping to clear things up, but his assistant informed me he was in meetings all day and unavailable. My emails requesting time on his calendar went unanswered. Alone in my office, I stared at the audit files, trying to understand what was happening. The betrayal stung not just professionally, but personally. Rachel had been my friend. Bradley had been my mentor. Now they were actively working to undermine me, and I had no idea why. As the days passed, the atmosphere at Riverton grew increasingly hostile. Colleagues who normally stopped by my office to chat now hurried past with averted eyes. Conversations in the break room fell silent when I entered. Even my own team members began to distance themselves, uncertain whether association with me might damage their own standing. I started documenting everything. Every email, every meeting, every phone call went into a detailed log. I saved copies of all my work files to an external drive, something technically against company policy, but necessary given the circumstances. If someone was altering my work or misrepresenting my findings, I needed proof of what I had actually done. The following week, I discovered that Rachel had been reassigned to work directly with Bradley on correcting the supposed errors in the Westfield audit. They held multiple closed-door meetings each day, excluding me, despite my role as lead analyst on the account. When I requested access to their revised documents, I received only vague responses about ongoing reviews and the need to ensure accuracy before sharing preliminary findings. The implication was clear: I was no longer trusted with the very project I had been assigned to lead. Then came the email that confirmed my worst fears. Westfield Industries' CFO had expressed serious concerns about discrepancies in their audit and requested a meeting with Riverton's senior management. The email, forwarded to all partners and senior staff, included a note from Marcus Daniels. "This situation requires immediate attention at the highest level. We cannot afford to lose Westfield's trust or their business. I want a complete review of how these errors occurred and who is responsible. This is not just about fixing the current audit, but ensuring such mistakes never happen again." The word mistakes felt like an accusation aimed directly at me. That afternoon, I found myself unable to access certain folders on our secure server folders containing original Westfield documentation that I had been working with just days earlier. My access had been restricted without notice or explanation. Desperate for answers, I reached out to James in IT, a quiet, bearded man who had helped me with technical issues in the past. We weren't close friends, but he had always been fair and straightforward. "I need to know who restricted my access," and when I told him, closing his office door behind me, "Something strange is happening with the Westfield audit." James shifted uncomfortably. "I shouldn't be discussing this with you, Colette." "Please," I said, not caring if I sounded desperate. "My entire career is on the line here." After a moment of internal struggle, he sighed. "Your access was restricted on Tuesday at Bradley's request. But there's something else you should know." He lowered his voice. "Rachel has been accessing your work files extensively over the past 2 weeks, sometimes after hours." My blood ran cold. Accessing my files. "Can you tell if anything was modified?" "I can't prove modifications without a formal investigation, but the access logs show she spent significant time in folders containing your portions of the Westfield audit." This confirmation of my suspicions brought no satisfaction, only dread. "Thank you, James. I appreciate your honesty." "Be careful," he warned as I left. I shouldn't have told you that. The next day, I confronted Rachel directly, catching her alone in the copy room. I know what you're doing, I said quietly, keeping my voice level despite the anger bubbling inside me. You found errors in your work, and you're trying to blame them on me. Rachel's friendly mask dropped instantly. That's a serious accusation, Colette. Maybe you should focus on your own performance issues instead of making up conspiracy theories. James told me you've been accessing my files. Why would you need to do that unless you were looking for something or planting evidence? Her eyes widened briefly before narrowing. I recommend you stop right there. If you continue spreading baseless allegations, I'll have to report you for harassment. It's not harassment to defend myself against false accusations. Rachel stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You should have just fixed the problems quietly when I pointed them out to you. Now it's too late. Marcus is involved, and someone has to take responsibility. Before I could respond, she walked away, leaving me stunned by the open admission that this was a deliberate setup. Later that afternoon, Bradley's assistant informed me he wanted to see me for a performance review. The timing made the purpose obvious, but I had no choice but to attend. Bradley's office felt colder than usual as I took a seat across from his imposing desk. He didn't bother with pleasantries. Colette, I think you know why I've called you in today. The situation with the Westfield audit has become untenable. I agree, I said firmly, but not for the reasons you seem to think. He ignored my comment. Marcus is extremely concerned about the errors that have been discovered. Westfield is one of our most valuable clients, and this incident has damaged their confidence in our firm. What errors, specifically? I challenged. Because I've reviewed my work repeatedly and found nothing that matches Rachel's claims. Bradley slid a folder across the desk. This contains a detailed analysis of the discrepancies. They're quite significant, Colette. Errors that someone at your level should never have made. I opened the folder to find a report I had never seen before, detailing accounting mistakes that bore little resemblance to my actual work. Someone had created an elaborate fiction designed to paint me as incompetent at best, negligent at worst. This is fabricated, I said, my voice shaking with anger. These are not my calculations or my methodologies. Bradley sighed, as if disappointed in a child. Denials won't help at this point. The evidence is clear. The question now is how we move forward. How we move forward is with the truth, I insisted. The truth is that serious errors were made under your supervision, errors that could cost this firm millions if they lead to Westfield taking their business elsewhere. His tone hardened. Marcus is considering disciplinary action. I'm trying to help you, Colette. The best path forward is to acknowledge the mistakes and show accountability. The implication was unmistakable: admit fault or face severe consequences. I can't take responsibility for errors I didn't make, I said, standing up. And I won't be scapegoated for someone else's mistakes. Bradley's expression darkened. That's unfortunate. I had hoped you would handle this professionally. Now I'll have to inform Marcus that you're being uncooperative. As I left his office, the full weight of my situation hit me. This wasn't just about a disputed audit anymore. My entire career was at risk, and the people I had trusted were actively working against me. 2 days later, I received a meeting invitation that sent ice through my veins. Subject: Westfield Audit Resolution. Location: Executive Conference Room. Attendees: Marcus Daniels, Bradley Thompson, Rachel Morgan, Samantha Wells, and me. Time: 4:30 p.m., after most staff would have left for the day. The purpose was clear without being stated. This was to be my execution, professionally speaking. I spent the intervening hours preparing as best I could, gathering what evidence remained accessible to me and organizing my thoughts. Without full access to the system, I couldn't prove definitively that my work had been altered, but I could demonstrate inconsistencies in their narrative. The executive conference room occupied the northeast corner of our floor with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering spectacular views of the city skyline. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated the setting. Instead, I felt like a condemned prisoner, being granted one last look at the world. I arrived 5 minutes early to find everyone already seated, a united front against me. Marcus Daniels sat at the head of the table, his expression grave. Bradley and Rachel occupied one side, while Samantha from HR sat opposite them, a leather portfolio open before her. "Please sit down," Colette Marcus directed, gesturing to the empty chair at the foot of the table, positioned to face all of them at once. I took my seat back, straight hands folded on the polished mahogany surface. I refused to appear intimidated, despite the pounding of my heart. "I assume you understand why we're here," Marcus began without preamble. "The situation with the Westfield audit has reached a critical point." "I understand there are questions about the audit," I replied carefully, "but I believe there's been a misrepresentation of my work." Marcus frowned. "This goes beyond questions. We have concrete evidence of significant errors in sections you personally handled." Bradley slid several documents across the table. "These spreadsheets show the original calculations you submitted compared to the corrected figures Rachel discovered during review." I examined the papers, feeling a surge of indignation. "These are not my original calculations. Someone has altered these files." "That's a serious accusation." Samantha interjected, her professional smile firmly in place. "Do you have any evidence to support such a claim?" I began to explain about the access logs James had mentioned, but Bradley cut me off. "Rachel was authorized to review all audit materials as part of our standard quality control process. There was nothing improper about her access." "What about the timing I countered? Why was she accessing my files, specifically after I raised concerns about her section of the audit?" Rachel's face flushed, but her voice remained steady. "I began a comprehensive review after noticing initial discrepancies in your work. The more I looked, the more problems I found." Marcus raised a hand to silence further debate. "The question of who accessed what files is secondary to the undeniable fact that errors were made. Errors that have now come to Westfield's attention." He slid another document toward me, this one bearing Westfield's letterhead. "Their CFO has written to express profound disappointment in the quality of our work. They're questioning whether to continue our relationship." The letter detailed concerns that matched exactly the fabricated errors I was being accused of making. The coordination was impressive in its thoroughness. "Westfield generates $7 million in annual revenue for this firm." Marcus continued, his voice taking on an edge. "Their departure would not only hurt our bottom line, but damage our reputation irreparably. Other clients would inevitably question our standards." I tried again to defend myself. "If we could just review the original documents together, I could demonstrate that my work was accurate." "We've spent the past week reviewing everything Bradley said with exaggerated patience. The errors are clear and undeniable." Every time I attempted to explain or defend myself, someone interrupted or dismissed my points without consideration. It wasn't a meeting to discover truth, but to establish guilt, my guilt specifically. After 20 minutes of this one-sided discussion, Marcus leaned forward, fixing me with a stern gaze. "Colette, mistakes happen in our profession. What matters is how we respond to them. Taking responsibility is the mark of a true professional." Samantha opened her portfolio and removed a single sheet of paper, placing it before me. We've prepared a statement acknowledging the errors and accepting responsibility for them. The document was worded carefully, admitting to significant accounting oversights and failure to follow established protocols without specifying details. It was designed to protect the firm while hanging me out to dry. "This will remain an internal matter," Samantha explained smoothly. "It won't appear in any public record or be shared with other firms. It simply allows us to move forward with Westfield and put this unfortunate incident behind us." I read through the statement twice, barely able to believe what they were asking me to do. "You want me to confess to mistakes I didn't make, to take the fall for someone else's errors." "We want you to do what's best for the firm," Bradley corrected. "The alternative is far worse for everyone, especially you." When I hesitated, Marcus's expression darkened. "Let me be perfectly clear about the stakes, Colette. If this statement isn't signed, we'll have no choice but to inform the appropriate regulatory authorities about potential negligence in financial reporting." His voice dropped to a menacing tone as he leaned closer. "Admit you made the error, or will involve the authorities. Think carefully about what that would mean for your career. No accounting firm would touch you after an investigation, regardless of the outcome." The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. They were holding my entire professional future hostage. "This is coercion," I said quietly. "This is business," Marcus replied without remorse. "Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good." Bradley, perhaps sensing my continued resistance, adopted a softer approach. "Colette, signing this statement is the cleanest resolution for everyone. The firm can satisfy Westfield, and you can move forward. We're not talking about termination here, just reassignment to different accounts." His false concern was almost more offensive than Marcus's open threats. "You've had a stellar record until now," Samantha added. "This one incident doesn't have to define your career." I looked around the table, seeing not colleagues but adversaries. They had orchestrated this entire scenario, manipulated evidence, and were now attempting to force me into becoming complicit in my own professional execution. "I need some time to consider this," I said, finally, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside. Marcus checked his watch impatiently. "You have 15 minutes. We need this resolved today." "I'd like to review the document alone," I requested. After a moment's hesitation, Marcus nodded. "You can use my office next door. Samantha will wait outside." As they filed out, leaving me with the confession, I felt the weight of the impossible choice before me. Fight and potentially lose everything, or sign and surrender my integrity. Marcus's office was intimidatingly large, with awards and credentials covering one wall and a view of the city dominating another. I sat at his desk, the confession paper before me, the weight of decision pressing down like a physical force. 15 minutes to determine my future. 15 minutes to decide between professional suicide and a fundamental betrayal of my own integrity. I read the document again, analyzing its wording with the same attention to detail I brought to financial statements. It was cleverly drafted to be simultaneously specific and vague, admitting to serious professional failures, without detailing exactly what those failures were. By signing, I would be giving them a blank check to define my mistakes however they wished. My mind raced through options, each seeming more hopeless than the last. If I refused to sign, they would make good on their threats. My career would be over. If I signed, I might keep my job, but at what cost? I would be admitting to incompetence. I hadn't demonstrated accepting blame for someone else's mistakes, and there was no guarantee they wouldn't use this confession against me later. Then I remembered something from a business law class I'd taken years ago. The professor, a former corporate attorney with a wry sense of humor, had once told us about the concept of duress in contract law. If you're ever forced to sign something against your will, he had said, add a note indicating you're signing under duress. It won't invalidate your signature immediately, but it creates grounds for later challenge. Could that work here? The document had no clause prohibiting additional notes or commentary. They had been so confident in their power play that they hadn't bothered to anticipate resistance. I glanced at my watch. 10 minutes left. Not much time for a detailed plan, but perhaps enough for a small act of defiance that could make a difference later. When Samantha knocked to indicate my time was nearly up, I made my request. I'd like to use my own pen, I said, reaching into my purse. It's a small thing, but important to me. She seemed puzzled, but nodded. Of course. Just hurry, please. Everyone's waiting. The pen I pulled out was no ordinary ballpoint. It was a fountain pen my father had given me when I graduated with my accounting degree, filled with a distinctive purple ink that I used for all important signatures. Its uniqueness would be crucial later. Back in the conference room, all eyes fixed on me as I approached the table. I could feel them watching, waiting for my surrender. Have you made your decision? Marcus asked, impatience evident in his tone. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I'll sign. The relief in the room was palpable. Bradley actually smiled while Rachel studied her hands, avoiding my eyes. I placed the document on the table and uncapped my fountain pen. With deliberate care, I added a single sentence at the bottom of the page just above where my signature would go. This statement is signed under duress and contains false accusations I've been forced to accept. My handwriting was neat and clear, the purple ink standing out against the black text of the document. Then I signed my name and added the date and exact time. No one bothered to review what I had written. Marcus immediately took the document, glanced at my signature, and nodded with satisfaction. A wise decision, he said, sliding the paper into a folder without reading the additional line. This allows everyone to move forward appropriately. What happens now? I asked, my heart still racing from my small act of rebellion. You'll be reassigned effective immediately. Bradley explained, his tone falsely sympathetic. And of course, you'll need to clear out your office. Samantha will accompany you to collect your personal items. Today, I asked, though I wasn't really surprised. It's best for everyone, Samantha confirmed with her perpetual professional smile. Clean break, fresh start tomorrow. As I was escorted to my office like a criminal, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Humiliation at being marched past curious colleagues, rage at the injustice of it all, but also, beneath those feelings, a tiny spark of satisfaction. They thought they had won completely, but I had planted a small seed of future resistance. Samantha watched as I packed my family photos, awards, and personal items into a cardboard box. The space I had occupied for 7 years was stripped of my presence in less than 20 minutes. Security met us at the elevator, a final indignity meant to communicate to everyone that I was no longer trusted. The message to other employees was clear: this is what happens when you don't play by the unspoken rules. As I walked to my car box in arms, the full weight of the day crashed down on me. My career, which I had built so carefully year after year, lay in ruins around me. The colleagues I had trusted had betrayed me without hesitation. The firm I had served loyally had discarded me to protect itself. Driving home through rush-hour traffic, tears finally came. Not gentle, dignified tears, but racking sobs that made it hard to see the road. I had to pull over twice to compose myself. By the time I reached my apartment, emotional exhaustion had replaced the tears. I placed the box from my office in a corner without unpacking it and collapsed onto my couch, too drained to even change out of my work clothes. The only thought providing any comfort was the knowledge that somewhere in Marcus's files lay a document with my purple-inked protest, a small time bomb of truth waiting to be discovered. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of Netflix ice cream and occasional bouts of crying. I ignored calls from concerned friends and family, unable to face their questions or explain my sudden reassignment. The shame of being scapegoated felt too raw to share even with those who would support me. On the third morning, I woke with a clarity that had eluded me since the confrontation. The pity party was over. It was time to fight back. My first step was research. I spent hours online learning about wrongful termination, constructive dismissal, and workplace fraud. The more I read, the more convinced I became that I had legal grounds to challenge what had happened. Next, I compiled everything I still had access to: emails I had forwarded to my personal account notes from meetings, the work logs I had meticulously maintained. It wasn't comprehensive proof of the conspiracy against me, but it established a timeline that raised serious questions about Rachel's and Bradley's actions. Armed with this information, I contacted Lauren Foster, an attorney specializing in employment disputes. Her office was small but tastefully appointed, suggesting successful practice without ostentation. Lauren listened carefully as I explained the situation, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly allowing me to tell my story uninterrupted. When I finished, she leaned forward with interest. The added sentence was clever, she said, genuine admiration in her tone. It creates what we call reasonable doubt about the voluntary nature of your confession. Did anyone witness you writing it? Samantha from HR was right there, though I don't think she was paying attention to exactly what I wrote. Lauren nodded. Even better. They can't claim you added it later without admitting they never properly reviewed a document of such importance. Will it be enough? I asked. They have all the original files access to the system. I can't prove they altered my work. You might not have to, Lauren replied already, formulating a strategy. The burden of proof works differently in civil cases. We just need to establish that your version of events is more likely than not. The added sentence, combined with the suspicious timing and your spotless prior record, creates a compelling narrative. Over the next week, we built our case methodically. Lauren drafted a formal letter to Riverton, claiming wrongful termination and demanding reinstatement plus damages. She advised me to contact James from IT, again discreetly. Though nervous about jeopardizing his own position, James agreed to meet me for coffee at a shop far from the office. There he provided what proved to be crucial evidence access logs, showing Rachel's extensive activity in my file directories, including several late-night sessions immediately after I had raised concerns about her work. I could lose my job for this, he admitted, sliding a USB drive across the table. But what they did to you was wrong. Everyone knows it, but they're all too scared to say anything. With James's evidence in hand, Lauren filed our lawsuit against Riverton Financial Services. The complaint detailed how I had been forced to sign a false confession under threat to my professional future, how evidence had been manipulated to make me appear negligent, and how the entire scheme had been orchestrated to protect the firm's relationship with Westfield at my expense. The most damaging piece of evidence was the confession itself. When Riverton's attorneys produced it during discovery, the purple-inked sentence stood out prominently. As Lauren had predicted, they tried to claim I had added it after signing, but the argument fell apart under scrutiny. If Miss Wagner added this line later, Why didn't anyone notice it during the meeting? Lauren asked during a deposition. Are we to believe that a document this important was never properly reviewed before filing, and how would she have accessed it after being escorted from the building? When the unique purple ink from my fountain pen was confirmed to match the signature, proving everything had been written at the same time, their position weakened further. The deposition process proved even more revealing than we had anticipated. Rachel, faced with direct questioning under oath about the timeline of events, became increasingly flustered. Miss Morgan, did you access Miss Wagner's work files after hours on March 10th? Lauren asked. I don't recall specific dates, Rachel hedged. I reviewed many files as part of my quality control duties. Let me refresh your memory, Lauren said, producing the access logs. According to IT records, you accessed her directories 27 times between 9 p.m. and midnight on March 10th. This was immediately after Miss Priam-Salinant. Wagner raised concerns about inconsistencies in your section of the audit, correct? Rachel's composure cracked. I was just doing my job. Bradley told me to find problems with her work. He said it was the only way to protect the firm. The admission sent shockwaves through the room. Riverton's attorneys called for an immediate recess, but the damage was done. Rachel had inadvertently confirmed the conspiracy we had alleged. When depositions resumed the following week, Bradley attempted to distance himself from Rachel's statement, portraying her as a rogue employee who had misinterpreted his instructions. I never directed Miss Morgan to fabricate evidence, he insisted. I simply asked her to review Miss Wagner's work thoroughly. Yet you presented her findings as fact, without verification, Lauren countered. And you participated in a meeting where my client was threatened with regulatory action if she didn't sign a confession. How is that not coercion? As Bradley's testimony unraveled, Marcus Daniels made a strategic decision. Rather than risk further exposure and potential damage to the firm's reputation, he authorized settlement discussions. The initial offer was insulting 6 months' salary and a neutral reference in exchange for dropping all claims and signing a non-disclosure agreement. We rejected it immediately. Our counter-demand was substantial: 3 years' salary, a public retraction of all allegations against me, in disciplinary action against those involved in the conspiracy, and no confidentiality clause that would prevent me from discussing what had happened. They'll never agree to no confidentiality, Lauren warned. That's standard in these settlements. Then we go to trial, I replied firmly. I won't be silenced about what they did. As the legal proceedings continued, something unexpected happened. Former colleagues began reaching out, offering support and additional information. Some had witnessed Bradley and Rachel meeting secretly before the accusations against me surfaced. Others had overheard comments suggesting a coordinated effort to shift blame. 2 had even been asked to corroborate false claims about my work and had refused. This groundswell of support strengthened our position considerably. What had seemed initially like my word against theirs had evolved into a well-documented case of workplace conspiracy and fraudulent accusations. The final breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Westfield Industries' new CFO contacted me directly after learning about the lawsuit. Apparently, they had never raised concerns about my work. The letter Marcus had shown me was fabricated, created to pressure me into accepting blame. We were told there were internal personnel issues at Riverton, he explained during a phone call. But no one ever specified problems with the audit itself. In fact, we were quite satisfied with your work in previous years. This revelation completed the picture. The entire scenario, from Rachel's accusations to the confrontation meeting, had been built on deception. With their position crumbling, Riverton had no choice but to offer a serious settlement. The final agreement exceeded even our ambitious demands: full financial compensation, removal of all negative documentation from my personnel, file a formal apology, and most importantly, no confidentiality requirement regarding the facts of the case. Rachel was terminated immediately. Bradley was demoted and removed from client contact roles. Marcus, though not directly fired, was asked by the board to step back from leadership positions and take early retirement within the year. The purple-inked sentence that had seemed like such a small act of defiance had ultimately triggered the collapse of their entire scheme. The day I received the settlement check should have felt like victory. The amount was substantial enough to provide financial security while I determined my next steps. The formal letter of apology acknowledged that I had been wrongfully accused and improperly pressured to accept responsibility for errors I hadn't committed. By any objective measure, I had won. Yet victory felt hollow. No amount of money could restore the trust I had lost, not just in former colleagues, but in the profession I had once loved. The experience had revealed an ugly truth. In many corporate environments, integrity remains negotiable when enough money is at stake. I declined Riverton's offer of reinstatement. The thought of returning to that building, walking past the executive conference room, where they had attempted to destroy my career, felt impossible. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. 2 weeks after the settlement, I received an unexpected call from Thomas Weber, Westfield Industries CFO. "I was impressed by how you handled the situation at Riverton," he said, after introducing himself. "It takes courage to stand up against that kind of pressure." "Thank you," I replied, unsure where the conversation was heading. "We're in need of someone to oversee an internal audit of our international operations," he continued. "Someone with both technical expertise and demonstrated integrity. Would you be interested in discussing the possibility?" The offer caught me completely off guard. Wouldn't hiring me create awkwardness with Riverton? They're still your auditors, aren't they? "Actually, we've terminated that relationship. Recent events raised questions about their ethical standards. We value accuracy over convenience." That conversation led to my first independent consulting contract. Working directly for Westfield, I helped identify and correct the very issues I had originally noticed in their international subsidiaries, the ones Rachel had attempted to hide. The work was challenging, but fulfilling, allowing me to use my skills while maintaining my principles. Word spread in industry circles about what had happened at Riverton and how I had stood my ground, rather than blackballing me as Bradley had threatened. The scandal actually enhanced my reputation. Other companies began reaching out seeking consultation from the analyst who wouldn't sign off on bad numbers. 6 months after leaving Riverton, I established Wagner Financial Integrity Consulting with a clear mission: helping companies maintain accurate financial reporting while navigating complex regulatory environments. My marketing materials never mentioned the Riverton incident directly, but my commitment to ethics became my unique selling proposition in an industry often criticized for flexible morality. The healing process wasn't linear. Some days I felt empowered by what I had overcome. Other days the trauma of betrayal resurfaced unexpectedly. I began working with a therapist who specialized in workplace trauma, learning to process the experience without letting it define me. Slowly, I rebuilt my ability to trust colleagues. James from IT became a trusted friend and eventually joined my growing consultancy to handle our technical needs. Several former Riverton employees who had supported me during the lawsuit also came aboard as we expanded. The most surprising relationship to emerge from the ordeal was with Samantha Wells. After leaving Riverton for another firm, she reached out to apologize for her role in what had happened. I compromised my own ethics by facilitating that meeting, she admitted during a lunch that began awkwardly but ended with mutual respect. Watching you stand up to them made me question what I was doing with my career. Though we never became close friends, our occasional professional interactions remained cordial, a small testament to the possibility of redemption. Rachel and I never spoke again. I heard through mutual connections that she struggled to find comparable employment after being terminated. While I didn't wish her ongoing hardship, I couldn't help but see poetic justice in her difficulty securing the trust of new employers. Bradley attempted to reach out once, sending an email that mixed apology with self-justification. I never responded. Some betrayals run too deep for words to bridge. 3 years after that fateful confrontation, my consulting firm had grown to 15 employees with clients across 3 states. The settlement money remained largely untouched, invested for future expansion. My work brought both financial success and personal satisfaction that had always eluded me in corporate environments. Looking back, I realized that my small act of rebellion, that single added sentence in purple ink, had changed everything. It wasn't just about protecting myself legally. It was about refusing to surrender my integrity even when all power seemed to be on the other side. The experience taught me lessons I now share with clients and colleagues alike. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong in a professional setting, it usually is. Document everything. Detailed records may seem paranoid until they become your only defense. Know your rights. Understanding basic employment law can make the difference between victimization and vindication. Find allies. Even in the most toxic workplaces, principled individuals exist who will support the truth. But most importantly, I learned that integrity isn't just a personal virtue, but a practical asset. In the short term, standing up for what's right might cost you. In the long run, it becomes the foundation upon which lasting success can be built. My name is Colette Wagner, and I refused to sign away my integrity even when it seemed like the only option. That one small decision, adding a single sentence before my signature, changed the trajectory of my entire life. Have you ever been pressured to accept blame for something you didn't do? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more accounts of standing up against workplace injustice. Like and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes small acts of resistance can lead to the biggest victories. Thank you for listening, and remember, your integrity belongs to you alone. No one can take it without your permission.